Hi, I'm Katy Barden and I am PRC's North East Regional Manager. And today I'm joined by a special guest, Jason Henderson. Jason is the press chief for the Muller Grand Prix in Gateshead, or was the press chief for the Muller Grand Prix in Gateshead, which took place at the end of May. He's also head of digital for Athletics Weekly, or AW, which is the world's #1 athletics magazine. He is a former AW editor and a writer and author as well. So he wears a few hats. And over the next 20 minutes or so, Jason and I are going to have a little chat about what it takes to deliver the media operation for a world-class sporting event, as well as some of the challenges that he faced and his team faced over the course of that night, and also what he learned from being on the other side as the press chief as opposed to the journalist. So welcome, Jason.
Hello, hiya.
Can you just give me a little bit of context first in terms of what your day job is and what your role was at the Diamond League Grand Prix event at Gateshead?
Okay, well, my day job is working for a magazine called Athletics Weekly, and I've been at the magazine for about a quarter of a century, so an awful long time. I started there in the sort of mid to late 1990s. The magazine itself started in 1945, so it's a very long-standing magazine. It was a weekly magazine for 70 years, up until the pandemic struck, and the pandemic obviously changed lots of businesses, and it changed us quite a lot as well, because we changed owners. We went into kind of limbo for a while. We didn't publish for a few months. And then we re-emerged as a monthly magazine. So we went from Athletics Weekly to what we call AW, which is a monthly magazine. We do a lot more online now as well, a lot more on our website and social media. And I guess it's similar to a lot of people will be familiar with GQ magazine, the men's magazine. That was originally Gentleman's Quarterly, but at some stage they changed to a monthly, and now people just know them as GQ. So that's been my job for the last almost 25 years, just basically covering the sport of athletics for Britain's #1 athletics magazine.
Yeah, and so when the Gateshead, the Muller Grand Prix came along, your team at AW were asked to cover the press operation and manage the media setup, and you were designated the role of press chief. So tell us a little bit about what that entails.
Yeah, it was quite daunting to begin with, and quite a little bit strange for me as well, because I've always been, what I would call a fly on the wall at British athletics televised events for many years. I've always been on a certain side of the fence, covering the meetings. I've been in the mix zone at these events, speaking to athletes. I've been up in the stands watching the action, reporting on the action. And I've kind of seen how they're organised, and I've been to many events over lots of years, but I'd never been on the other side of the fence. So I've never actually been the other side of the mix zone barriers, and never really got involved with things like a flash quotes team and stuff like that. So it was all pretty new to me from that regard.
Yeah, and it's not, I should explain to people that don't follow track and field. The Gateshead meeting formed part of the World Athletics Diamond League series, which is, I think, 14 events across the world over the course of the summer. So it's a pretty major event, and it's one of the top meetings throughout the summer, and it's very high profile. So in a typical year, so pre-COVID, when you were maybe attending as a journalist, what kind of numbers would you expect of media to be turning up at those events?
Yeah, so as you say, some of these events are pretty high profile, like the Gateshead one. They're basically the best athletics meetings outside of the major championships. The Olympics and World Championships. You have lots of the big stars there, and I think typically, kind of before the pandemic, you'd have a media section which would it would have a lot of journalists in it. I'm not quite sure about numbers pre-pandemic, but you'd have reporters from every national newspaper, some regional press as well, lots of radio channels, TV as well. It would be pretty busy. I think the number of photographers at a typical meeting like this might be up to 60, 70. I think when the London Anniversary Games has taken place, for instance, in recent years, I think they've had about 80 plus photographers. So we had slightly fewer figures for Gateshead recently, largely due to the coronavirus restrictions, which obviously made things a bit of a challenge.
But that said, it was one of the first events that British athletics, or that had been pulled off in the UK, where it was a live in person mix zone area as opposed to a virtual setup. And so there were still media in attendance there. There were broadcasters in the mix zone, and obviously the media themselves weren't present. There was a setup whereby they were provided with the information. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, so the setup we had in Gateshead was, we had about, I think it was almost up to 20 media in the Tribune that were kind of written and online press, but they basically couldn't move around. So ordinarily, pre-pandemic, they'd be able to, run around the stadium more or less with quite a lot of access and being able to move around pretty freely. And their main journey would be back and forth to the mix zone to speak to the athletes, but that wasn't possible this time due to social distancing and the restrictions. So they had to pretty much sit in their seats for the entire meeting, and we had a virtual mix zone with a 2-person team, someone on a camera with a camera and somebody doing interviews, where they would interview all the athletes who stepped off the track, and those interviews would be shown virtually, and the athletes in the Tribune or in the main stadium would basically be watching these interviews unfold on their laptops with earphones on, and then they would have the ability to ask their own questions, from basically being probably about 50 or 60 meters away in the stadium. And it worked fairly well. I mean, the journalists would have preferred to have gone down into the mix zone and spoken to the athletes face to face, but in the circumstances, it worked pretty well, and the journalists were able to be at the event, to watch the action live, and have a kind of connection of sorts with the athletes as they were coming through the mix zone.
Yes, sorry, my error. It was virtual in the sense that the journalists weren't present, but it was face to face, and that you had to coordinate a team on the ground to do those interviews, to capture quotes from the athletes and to provide those quotes to the journalists. So, so that put quite a lot of pressure on you as the press chief to make sure that information was accurate and informative and useful for the press. Because I guess with your other hat on, sitting up there in the press tribune, what would be your sort of expectations from that team on the ground that are providing that information for you, that service? What are you looking for?
I think first of all, you wouldn't want to miss anybody. So the team that were operating the virtual mix zone, I mean, they're under pressure to get pretty much every winner on the night, and then what you might describe as other notable athletes. So if there were any top British athletes, with it being a British meeting, who maybe finished second, third, fourth, but did a really good performance, they would want to try and catch them as well.
I mean, we did have there were some world-class British athletes present in Gateshead, with Dean Asher-Smith and Laura Muir and others. So they were there, they were present in the Northeast, which was great.
Yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, the virtual mix zone, we just literally try and catch everybody, and then just try and get good answers from these athletes. I mean, you don't really just want fairly bland answers with them just saying that they felt good and the weather wasn't very nice. You want to try and maybe find out a little bit more about their performance. So it was all about the virtual mix zone team kind of asking the right questions, so that the journalists up in the stadium were able to get some good quotes to play with. And in addition to the virtual mix zone operation, which happened, via video, we also had a flash quotes team. So the flash quotes team were on a mission to get quotes from all the winners, and very often athletes that finished second and third as well, just so that we, literally had some kind of view or opinion from most of the key athletes who competed on the night.
Yeah, it was certainly a busy evening, and the weather was not nice. So it was definitely best to steer clear of those questions, I'm sure. And in addition to the stuff that happens on the night, I think it's quite topical to touch on the pre-event press conferences and the role that athletes have to play, and their commitment to that. Obviously, recently Naomi Osaka's been quite prominent in the press with her views on press conferences and why she wasn't going to take part recently in her tennis event. But in athletics, certainly at this event, athletes have it written into their contracts that they should take part in press conferences. And I think it's probably fair to say that on the whole, they do so without much complaint. Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think most athletes realise that it's in their best interest to speak to the media and let everybody know their story. So yeah, pretty much in most cases, I think athletes are quite keen to do that. I mean, the Naomi Osaka case has been really well publicised recently. I think she's a bit of a one-off in that she wasn't keen to do press conferences. But on the whole, I would say most athletes are certainly in track and field athletics. Most of the performers are pretty much up for doing it. It can be a bit daunting, sitting there. I mean, a lot of these athletes are still fairly young. They're sometimes a bit shy. It can be quite daunting, but I think they realise that it's a way for them to make a name for themselves. And often in these days, it's often not enough just to do good performances, to run fast or jump far or throw a long way. They have to kind of back it up by letting people know their story as well. And I think they recognise that and are very often quite happy to do press conferences.
Yeah, they're increasingly commercially aware, aren't they? And that's just a requirement that it's becoming more and more prominent for them, so they have to do their bit. And yeah, you're right, they've got the opportunity to stand up and tell their story, and in a situation that is perhaps less intense than the mix zone that you just talked about, because it is either pre-event or sometime post-event where they've had the chance to get their thoughts together and really think about what they're going to say. So I guess it does have some value. But with your other hat on as a journalist, what value do those press conference setups give you as a writer? If you say pre-Gateshead, you had Laura Muir up on the stage alongside Dean Asher-Smith. So with your journalistic hat on, what kind of value would you get from that pre-event?
I think as an athletics reporter, you're basically looking to write preview stuff and then the coverage itself. So those press conferences are just invaluable when it comes to writing the preview material. You just want to find out if the athletes are in good shape, if they're confident, what their thoughts are going into an event, and it just gives you a real last minute update as to how confident they are and what they're feeling like right on the eve of the meeting. I think for me the only sort of downfall with press conferences like that is that when the athletes talk, the quotes obviously go to everybody. They're all out there. So as a journalist, you never really get any kind of anything exclusive. I think if you want something exclusive, you probably have to do a lot more work ahead of the meeting and try and secure a one-to-one at some stage, which can often be quite difficult, especially if the athletes maybe training in a warm weather scenario abroad or at altitude. They might just simply be unavailable. But yeah, the press conferences are useful, but as I say, you'll never get anything absolutely exclusive, because the moment the athlete talks, you've got maybe 20, 30 journalists in the room who are all recording the same quotes and often in some cases just putting them out there straight away on social media. They might just put the best bits out there straight away within seconds. Many of the press conferences these days as well are on YouTube as well, so literally anybody in the world can sit there and watch them unfold and can produce their own stories for whichever newspaper or website or whatever they work for.
Yeah, but everyone can become a journalist, can't they? From their own room.
Exactly.
Actually, I think that for me, that says something else. I mean, you've worked, like you touched on from the beginning, you worked in the sport for a long time, and I think you've been to what, 5 Olympic Games, something like that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Don't want to give away your age, Jason, but quite a few, which is good. But actually, with that comes the opportunity to build relationships with athletes, and that's a helpful process, isn't it, as well, in terms of those exclusives you talk about. Over time, when the athletes get to know you, they get to trust you, and surely that must be beneficial in terms of capturing that exclusive content that you mentioned.
Yeah, it definitely helps. If you've been covering a certain sport for a long time, it certainly helps. I mean, if you put yourself in the shoes of a well-known athlete who's maybe 24, 25, 26 years old, and they've got the potential to win Olympic medals, if they have a journalist who asks if they can have a one-to-one interview, in the run-up to a major championship, and that same journalist was there when they were 14, 15 years old, winning schools titles, and has kind of followed them the whole way through their journey, then I think they're more likely to say yes to that request than, say, the request from just, a completely new, relatively unknown journalist who has just kind of come onto the scene and has just requested an interview. I think there would be a degree of kind of loyalty and sort of payback, if you like, to a journalist who's kind of put in the hard yards and was there when they were first competing when they were a teenager.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really important. Relationships, I think, across the board are important, but definitely make it worthwhile in the sport, especially. Just going back to Gateshead briefly, in the role as press chief, was there any challenges particularly that you faced, or any lessons that you learned that came as a bit of a surprise over the course of the build-up and the event?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think there were a few surprises. I mean, as I say, I was very new to the role. I'd been an athletics reporter for many years, so I hadn't been involved in organising the press side of things for journalists. And yeah, there were plenty of surprises. I think I was rather surprised in the run up to the event at the way that journalists really kind of expected athletes to be kind of served up to them for interviews. I think when I started out as an athletics writer, we would have a sort of bulging contacts book full of athletes' phone numbers and stuff, and you would have relationships with athletes and just contact them direct, or you'd contact their coaches. And over the years, that's kind of fizzled out. I think athletes, and I think this is the same throughout all sports, athletes have become a bit more private. They've got they have managers and coaches who kind of protect them a little bit more from the media, and it's become not so much the done thing just to go straight to athletes to contact them, and consequently we've seen the a growth in a kind of rise of organised interviews and press conferences and group interviews, and in the past 18 months or so, a lot more Zoom interviews as well with athletes. And in the run-up to the Gateshead meeting, I just realised there was quite a demand from journalists for me just to set things up for them, because they just, they don't have the same access to athletes that they had maybe 15, 20, 25 years ago. It's not as easy these days. So that was a slight surprise. And then apart from that, I guess it was just the random questions that didn't really relate to sport, such as, are there any hot drinks at the venue? Is there any food? Where can I park? I mean, I organised a different event a few days ago before our chat here, and a journalist was ringing me up an hour before the meeting saying he was lost and how could he get to the stadium, and so it's all those kind of just simple things really that people need to know, just simple things relating to food and drink and car parking and stuff like that.
Can't work properly if you're hungry.
Yeah.
But all of that will serve you well, because the good news is that Britain's second Diamond League event of this summer has also been confirmed for Gateshead. It was scheduled initially to be in London, but various conversations have since taken place with West Ham, who also play in that stadium, and also just with implications of the pandemic and all the rest of it. And the good news is we're back in the Northeast. Or you are back in the Northeast on Tuesday the 13th of July, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And the stadium in Gateshead holds about, I think it's almost up to 12,000 people when it's full. And for the first meeting this summer, we just had 4,000 people in the stadium. Beg your pardon, it was 2,000, just 2,000 people in the stadium. But we're hoping to get, to bump those numbers up and get more people in. And more media as well, because the media were really restricted for the first Gateshead meeting. We just had about 20 written press and about half a dozen photographers, which is not very many at all. But we're hoping to get those numbers up for the second meeting, which, as we talk, is in a few weeks' time. So hopefully we can allow a few more people back into the arena.
Great. Well, thank you. That was a really interesting insight into media operations and just some of the challenges you faced and some of the topical points that are coming out of sport and media at the moment. So thank you very much, Jason. Good to talk to you.
It's okay.